How many times have you seen Pearl Jam live?
I've
Yeah.
seen them 3 times live. Wish I'd seen them 10 times that, but 3 times. Fenway Park, which was
No
unbelievable.
way. Are you serious?
Yeah. Yeah, that was my favorite one. Well, actually, my first time in Toronto was fantastic as well. That was outside. And then one time in Columbia, South Carolina, which was different, right? That was inside in the South, where it was a different crowd than I've seen Pearl Jam with. So it was pretty interesting there too.
When you saw them at Fenway, were you on the road with a team at the time, or was that just a trip out there just to catch them?
No, it was just a trip. I was living in New York, upstate New York at the time, coaching the Adirondack Thunder, and my wife and I went down and we just went solely for the show to Boston and had a fantastic time. It was her only time seeing Pearl Jam, or actually, no, her second, but she really liked it. She likes the outdoor, more spacious kind of setting.
You mentioned South Carolina. Are you familiar with the PayPal Mafia? Do you know what that is?
No, I'm not familiar with PayPal Mafia.
So the original team of PayPal, there's this like photo, and there's like the original 9 guys, and every one of them. So like Elon Musk is in there. We all know Elon
Oh,
Musk. Reid Hoffman goes on to co-found LinkedIn. All 9 of these people go on to have these astonishing careers in tech. They call them the PayPal Mafia. I think we need to start the South Carolina Stingrays Mafia, because we had Ryan Warsofsky on the show at the end of last year, and just doing research like on your background. I'm like, it's unbelievable. If it's not the pay, it's a 30 for 30 doc for sure. Um, can you just maybe touch on the long term benefits of being a part of that alumni?
well, like huge. It's just it's an honor in terms of, like, as you mentioned, like the guys have gone on to do some pretty cool things, and certainly being able to like stay in touch with those guys is awesome. The idea that we when you work in the ECHL, I think you have a whole different perspective on pro hockey. I think that you do it for the love of the game. And guys that play in that league, we played for the love of the game. We were not breaking the bank, and we had a ton of fun. And I think that the guys that continued in hockey and have worked their way up through the ranks, I think hold a special bond in terms of that, because we will never get away with anything but being modest about what we're doing now, because we've
Yeah.
been on the buses with our friends and they'll never let us forget, like, hey, we were banging around, should have been like moving on after a while and doing something else, but we were sticking with it, and we love the guys that we grew up with. So it's pretty awesome to have that network of guys and have that connection to South Carolina, and not just the guys that like Bedsy and Warsofsky and Carbs that graduated out of there, but the other guys that are around still, that are such good friends, are the guys we played with, the guys that helped us through the organization.
One thing that I've taken from just conversations with some of the coaches you just mentioned is that and this is free to everybody, but just the value of having people you can pick up the phone and call. Maybe it's getting together in the off season for a check-in, but just having the right kind of sounding board as you navigate a career in coaching it would appear to be invaluable.
Yeah, I think it really is. Like, it is it's a it's a difficult job. It's ever changing, and then to be able to ask people who are at different points in their career and have held a lot of different positions that we all have as we've grown through the game, gives those different perspectives. And I think that's what you're really looking for, is just a fresh look at a problem that you may have, or fresh perspective on how to view something. So with Jared Bednar, I know what kind of person he is. We've worked together. I've played for him. I know how he views the world I've got a pretty good idea there. And vice versa, Spencer Carberry sees things a little differently. So you can ask them the same question and chat with them about something from a different angle that, as you know, Aaron, you live in the world of information is gold. Like the more
Yeah.
you can gather and just sort of learn about different ways to do things, the more you can formulate your own opinions and have confidence in those.
So you play for Jared Bednar. Next year, you're his assistant coach. He
Yeah,
moved on. You become the head
yeah.
coach in South Carolina. Spencer Carberry plays for you. And then the next year steps behind the bench as your assistant coach. In hindsight, what do you think Jared saw in you, and what did you perhaps see in Spencer as players that signaled they might make good coaches?
Oh, I think obviously leadership in general, like the willingness to be professional, show up every day, and help not only your self but your teammates approach the game in a professional manner. The resources at the ECHL level are less, and it is easier for everyone involved to have maybe a more lackadaisical outlook on how the daily gets run, right? And how you show up and what kind of pride you take in it. So I think that is something that Jared saw in me in terms of not just leadership, but professionalism and care about, how I did every day. I wanted to make sure I did everything I could for my team, my coach, and myself every day. And I saw similar things in Spencer as he came through. He was a great leader. He was there for his team and he didn't take a day off. And so I think when you start to put those, like that is a pretty universal set of traits for sporting, like whether it's athletes or coaches, those are pretty coveted. So I think that they just recognize like these guys, no matter what the stakes are, they're going to bring their best every time. And I think that is what we recognize in each other to carry the torch further in our organization.
I sense like that there's maybe an underlying lesson there just in terms of, and I mean, we hear, players sometimes that'll say something to the effect of, "Oh gosh, if I played on that line, or if I was called up to that team, well, then I would be really committed, or then I would do things to a different
Yeah,
level." And I, and I think what you just pointed out from a coaching perspective has been true is that, the top coaches, they approached the gig they had early in their career probably with the same commitment and focus that, they do now if, let's say they're in the NHL.
yeah, I think that's 100%. I think it's part of your personality. And I think that it is something that you can learn to improve. But for the most part, if you don't have that kind of work ethic and that drive to just really comes down to just do the best that you possibly can with what you have. I think that's one of the foremost drivers of it. And I've always sort of that's been part of me. I think my parents taught me that, and I always felt like we used to a guy I trained with growing up, we used to talk about the luck or the harder I work, the luckier I get. And I've always believed in that. I think that you sort of make your own luck. And if you do things right and treat people right and do it consistently, then things will work out for you. And the South Carolina Stingrays are an excellent example of that. Like if you act in an upstanding way and bring your best to the table, they rewarded it. And then, here we are a decade later, and five of us with Jason Fitzsimmons are working in the NHL. So I
It's
can't say
wild.
enough about that organizational philosophy and the people that helped us do it.
Well, TBD, we should do a coaching clinic in Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And hey, you'll have no problem filling that clinic either. As we all know, it's a gem. It's not so hidden anymore.
I've never been. I've just heard from everybody. They're like, it's awesome, and obviously the golf and the beaches and everything else. So
Beaches.
that's
Yeah.
let's put that on the to do list as you go through, or anybody goes through their coaching journey. That, over time, it's not an immediate thing, but over time you start to develop your own coaching philosophy. And again, I sense just from conversations on this show that sometimes those aren't by design. Like they just sort of fall in your lap throughout your career, and then you get to choose what you keep and what you don't. Do you have any examples of, maybe a specific philosophy and where that seed was planted in your career?
I think there's a couple, like I have a couple different examples of like just where you take things from people.
Yeah.
Um, and geez, I probably have more than a couple, but bottom line, Troy Ward, one of your original presenters.
Texting with him this morning.
Yeah, great man, a great teacher. I had him as a coach in Trenton, and he was an excellent coach. Like we had a great team. It was a crime that we lost to the South Carolina Stingrays in the finals. It's ironic, but it was a crime. But he, Troy, when I worked with him in Abbotsford, the level of detail in his teaching was something that stuck with me. Like that made me a great, I shouldn't say great coach, but a much better coach, having been with him and being able to take that part of how he approaches so many things, but especially just the forethought that goes into how he teaches something, whether it's at the board or whether it's through the video. The little things about how to present, not just the length of the clips, but the presentation and clarity when you're talking about something to your team or an individual. Just an elite teacher of how to communicate the game, which I think is exactly what he presented at the coach's site
He
in
did.
that
Yeah.
first
Language of hockey.
presentation,
It's a
the language of
classic.
hockey.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So there's an example. Another example is the idea that later on working with um, in Stockton with Ryan Huska, Dom Pittis as an assistant coach. Just talking more about, like, Dom and I used to talk about things like the principles of play as opposed to this, the specifics of structure. And that's something that I've sort of carried on from there. We talked about other sports and how European football, the idea of how they integrate principles of play into their game and use that to create that, what I would call a framework for how teams can have that collective kind of understanding with each other. And that's something that I've sort of tried to carry through to utilize. And I think there's a lot of different areas when you work for more people and when you work in different positions where you can accumulate a lot of things that you can then sift through, or they just sort of embed themselves into your coaching philosophy.
So I was reading that, this off season, you were tasked with the Flames power play, and there's a headline on an article. I believe it's on Flames.com. But it was a quote from you saying that, you were going to give the players a framework. And I think the context was, instead of, as you said, just a very rigid, system on how to approach it. And so a couple of years ago, Mike Johnson from the Portland Winterhawks presented at one of our events, and it was anchored in, having principles versus systems. And so an example that he would give is, he'd say, one of their principles was that off the rush, when they carried the puck over the blue line, they wanted their defensemen to be crossing the center ice red line. So that was
Yeah.
the principle that they gave their players. I guess my question is twofold. One, how do you, great timing because it's training camp, so you'd have an opportunity to introduce some of those frameworks on the power play. What might that look like without obviously giving too much
Yeah.
away?
Well, I think that the one thing that I worked on, one thing that was really more difficult is I dove into the power play when I got the position in the late spring. And I took a couple months to like really look at NHL power plays and NHL power play goals and see where goals came from and try to understand a little bit more about, like, yes, there's a down and in play where, from flank to goal line to bumper, but what are the elements that allow that play to happen? Like, what are consistent things that are happening that lead to goals, and try to distill it down to more generic kind of ideas that if the group of five can understand that if we, rather than talk about these different set plays, we want to think about using just a few principles that whenever we're on the attack, that we're going to use them. But the hard part, what I'm getting at, is that it took a while to boil those down.
Yeah.
Took some good conversations with different people, and then by the time we get to camp, you had to, in my opinion, really continue to make sure that they're clear and real simple, so that if one of our principles coming through the, for the breakout or entry is speed through the neutral zone, and what that looks like in terms of, a lot of people talk about having four chambers full at the blue line, where you've got
Ford. Okay.
four chambers of player moving with speed over the attacking blue line, and find a way to going back to the Troy Ward language of hockey, make that a clear and concise message that's repeatable and that is understandable for the players by being, having good buzzwords attached to it, so that when we hit it in video, I don't have to explain it every time. I've starting to establish with the guys, and it's starting to become part of their language. So when we organize for our breakouts, then it becomes accomplishing that principle, as opposed to, you need to be a little bit here, you need to be a little bit there, because in games like hockey, invasion sports, it's chaos, right? And if we try to control that chaos too much, then we're going to find ourselves joysticking the players, and it's not going to work for anyone. So I think that's the thing, is I'm pretty excited about it, because it seems like that would be the way as a player you want to play, and I want to work with them and hopefully accomplish that, so that we can get to that point where they can be like, yeah, Cail, we know what we need at the blue line. Let us
Yeah.
figure it out. We'll get it for you.
Got it. And where does that sort of, what's the order of communicating or teaching that? Does it start with, say, a video session when players arrive at camp? Do you go on the ice in sort of a 5-on-0 situation? How do you, where do those breadcrumbs?
I think at the NHL level with a short camp, it starts with a video session, but not. I think that's a key that I would give to younger coaches. It can't be a video session where you try to unload everything you've thought of in the
Yeah.
summertime onto your players. I think it's got to be a video session where it's like, hey, let's just get this. Okay, we're going to work on breakouts and entries into the offensive zone on the power play. Give me this. Just give me these two or three things. That's all I'm looking for. Let's not overanalyze, who's where, when, what the deception for our D men is or anything. I just want to see, for example, this speed over the line. And if we start doing that consistently, now you can sort of pull your quarterback or your defenseman aside and be like, okay, you've got the mentality. Now let's mix in a little deception. Can you look this guy off and then slip here? But that for me, Aaron, would be a big one, is real succinct, clear video, very short, then go out and work on it, and then try to get some footage on it in terms of video that you can work with. And I think the younger you get, the more you're just going to give them, even on a whiteboard, give them two or three things and just have them go and try to accomplish it. But I will note, at the NHL level, it's tricky, because you want to do it early in camp, but you also have a lot of guys on your squad, and it's a very specialized situation on the power play. So you got to manage how you give it to them, because there's a lot of guys here that aren't going to play on the power play, so we're not going to spend a lot of time with them as a group in that area.
Sure. Um, One of the players you are going to work with on the power play is Andrei Kuzmenko.
Yeah,
And he was here in Vancouver, where I'm at,
yeah,
and based on my evaluations, just a very cerebral player,
yeah,
and someone I always looked at. I'm like, you probably can't have 12 Kuzmenkos up front, but you can have one or two for sure in the right situations. And the power play was humming here in Vancouver before he got traded to Calgary,
yeah,
and it took a big dip. And this was my evaluation, and I sensed that there might be something to learn here. Like when he was out in the power play, everybody in the rink knew that he wanted the puck. And he had this energy. And I would, go back and look at clips and I'd be like, there's nothing, at least that stood out to me, that he did that was unique, other than he just seemed to have this power play energy that upped the urgency for everybody. And that was sort of that was my layman's interpretation of it. And I just thought about that, the value of having somebody on your power play that maybe increases the intensity, and if anything else, just becomes somebody that the other team has no choice but to maybe focus on or even over focus on, and maybe that creates a bit more space for other players on the ice.
Yeah, the value is huge. I agree. And I agree with your assessment. I think he's a player that is born to score goals,
Yeah.
bottom line. Loves it, lives for it, wants to do it before and after practice, and is what, keeps him awake at night when he doesn't. And I think that is a shot to your power play's arm in terms of the energy level. It happened when he came here. It took a little while last year, but at the end of the year, our power play really started to heat up, and a lot of stuff ran through Kuzi, and not just the finished product in terms of the goal scoring, but a lot of plays that he made, from flank or goal line positions. And he was a guy that, and is a guy that brings so much to our game in terms of the offense. And it's a good example of someone that you want to give him the opportunity and allow him the freedom. That's why I would
Yeah.
go back to the framework idea, because no one wants to score a goal more in that building than Kuzi. So don't try to overscript how he does it. He'll figure out a way. He thinks about it night and day, and it's fun to watch. I love it. I have a ton of time for people who love to score, because I think that they, in my opinion, they want to do it for their team as much as themselves, and
Yeah.
it fires them up like a Kuzi it fires him up to an extent where you can tell there's joy in him. But I think there's, the part of the joy comes from how he knows he's helping his team when he scores. And that's something that I think is underestimated in goal scorers at that level. They don't just love it. They love helping their team. That's their shot block. That's their big hit. That's, they love that aspect of giving to their team, and they love scoring goals.
Yeah, it's funny. I was coming back on a plane last week, and I was rewatching old Ted Lasso episodes. And there's the character in the show is football is life, and he just brings this like passion to the game.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's probably kind of like you kind of need one of those in the locker room, that just
Yeah.
somebody that it is a little bit contagious.
100%.
Um, you know, given what's at stake in an NHL season, I get stressed out trying to put myself in the shoes of an NHL coach when you've got this limited amount of time. I'm sure that there's, on the whiteboard somewhere in the Calgary Flames coaching office, there's probably a litany of systems and details and things that you want to cover. And just given the schedule that you're afforded, I can't imagine how you even get to 10% of it. How do you evaluate what you do touch on, and what might be, for the, when the puck drops on opening night, what might be some of the areas where you say we're going to prioritize these things, in terms of just creating a foundation for how we want to play this year?
I think that starts in the summer when you meet as a staff. With our staff, we met. Um, Brad Larson came into the fold this summer,
Yeah.
so he was here in July with all of us, and we had a great conversation. Assistant coaches, goalie coaches, some analytics talk, AHL coaching staff, and just the opportunity for Ryan Huska to get us all together and discuss, where we wanted to go, what we think is important, how we feel we're going to get there. That starts to give us some clarity in terms of what we want for an identity. And then from there, we start to hone in on the identity part. Like, what do we need to make sure is dialed for us before anything else happens? And that's something that we've really hit on in camp through 5 days now. And I feel like it hasn't been overly offensive in terms of that identity. It's been taken care of, making our team hard to play against. And ironically, at this point in our exhibition season, I think we're outscoring teams 18-5 after 3 games. But so it just goes to show you, like, I know it's exhibition. It's really
Yeah.
early. We're not getting ahead of ourselves, but it goes to show you that if you get mindset and identity as your main focus, which like that'll start to set you up. If we can keep pushing down that path, I think that we're going to be in good shape to get off to a good start in the season.
Um, Speaking of offense, you spoke at TCS Live at the University of Michigan last year, and you did a presentation on exploiting the middle of the ice, or how to get to the middle of the ice. And I think one of the statistics you shared is that 80% of the game is played outside the dots. So, but offense generally is created within the dots. So, I'm not a math whiz by any stretch, but I can, you know, you can connect those pretty easily.
Yeah,
So one of the things you also touched on was that the importance of amongst players just consistent plays and having some sort of, I don't want to say set plays is probably the wrong language, but having consistency with players on where the puck's going to move and what areas of the ice they have to get to.
yeah,
And it's interesting because I think a lot of the plays, certainly when we watch the highlights at night, a lot of the goals we see would come from creativity, and I wonder um, is a lot of time creativity born out of just some of those simple routine plays that players can count on that maybe gives them the space to then make that next play, or does there maybe have to be some sort of relationship between um, consistency that then leads to creativity offensively?
yeah. I think we're in total agreement. The way I see it is a good set of simple principles will establish like a general framework or a general consistency on what is going to happen with the puck carrier and where his support is going to be. And what that allows is unstructured creativity. Because within that frame, like that framework, at any point, you go off script, like take advantage of the opportunity that presents itself. But we need a little bit of consistency in order to reduce the chaos in a naturally chaotic sport. The whole idea that you're never going to deal with the same play twice is so accentuated in hockey, I think, because the movement of players is so fast, and like the slightest difference in depth or stick or lane, everything is very different. So to overscript it, I think it makes it really tough, gets players thinking more and playing less instinctual. So when you see a lot of these highlight plays, I do think that it is the sense that an offensive player knows that there's going to be a presence on the weak side of the net in the offensive zone. So it's he's buying time and he knows where to look, and then he has the acumen and B, the skill and the speed of hands to make that next play, which not a lot of people can.
Yeah.
But it's a connection between on puck and off puck to know the holes that are probably going to be filled, and that creates that allows for that creativity. I do think that a lot. I think that, and it's something as a younger coach, I know myself, I was always quite consumed with X's and O's and fascinated with how the game
Yeah.
works structurally, because you need to catch up and learn that. And then as you get up to the NHL level, then you've got coaches who've been doing it forever who are sort of over it, right? Over the X's and O's, and they're excellent coaches, and they're like, hey, stop over, coaching them. Let them play and let them go. And so we're all learning all the time. Every year, as you would probably attest to, Aaron, every year you look back on who you were as a coach, even the previous year or the previous couple of years, and you're like, geez, man, I feel like I'm a way better coach than I was then, and it's,
100%. Yeah.
yeah. And sometimes you look back and you're like, oh gosh, I hope I didn't hurt them,
Yeah.
but, that's the beauty. That's one of the beauties of this occupation, right? Is that you feel the growth and you're constantly learning. And I think a lot of us are set up to enjoy that,
Yeah.
so that the hunt's never over. So that's part of what makes it an enjoyable occupation.
So when we take that idea of the principles in practice, and so coaches, if they for anybody that's out planning their season right now, and they've got a bunch of drills, and they're figuring out maybe how they're gonna piece
Mm-hmm.
it all together, would maybe, and I think this maybe applies particularly if you're at a level where you might only practice twice a week. Would maybe the one approach be to say, hey, identify some of those principles, and regardless of the drill, just make sure that these show up in every drill. Like the drills maybe aren't as important as the
Yeah.
principles, and just say, just stick to these things. So whatever you're doing, just make sure you just keep going back to these 6 things, and that's how you're going to build some
Yeah.
consistency and, as you said, an identity in your team.
Yeah. I think so. 100%. So if you just took the neutral zone, say the
Yeah,
offensively in the neutral zone, and we said, okay, one of our principles is we want to get the puck off the wall. And I don't just mean passing that, I mean like skate it into the middle of the ice. That's one of our principles. Another one of our principles is we want to have speed coming over the blue line. Okay, in 3 lanes. We're 5-on-5, so we want to have 3 lanes of speed coming over the blue line. And a third principle is we want to create 2-on-1s on one defender. Then just as you mentioned, your drill should reflect that. So you could do the breakout, go down 3-on-0 drills all day long, but you're never going to get any good at creating 2-on-1s on defensemen, which is what the game is all about, is creating, if you don't do that. So for me, what I would really push for younger coaches or coaches of younger players is, get a few clear principles and then try to hit them. When you're doing a
yeah,
drill, what principle does it hit? And the other thing that I would say, I'm a huge believer in constraints-led approach of how to teach any kind of game with in the style of hockey. So if you need to make the game, or sorry, your practice environment replicate the game.
yeah,
So if you look at your practice and it doesn't look like a game would look, then you need to think about, how can I just tweak this a little bit? Can I just have one coach go at this defenseman as he's grabbing the puck in the corner
yeah,
to make him feel a little bit of the pressure that he would feel in a game? Because that's going to make him better, even if 3 of the 5 times he messes the pass up, and because that's the only thing that's going to make him better is reading a coach pressure, making a play through someone. And that is the thing that I think is so important. It's not just a small area game. It's a way to say, whether it's a small area game or an actual drill, how can I replicate the game environment? Don't overcomplicate it. Just try to make it feel real for the kids. And then they're going to be playing and having fun, which is a huge benefit. And they're going to get better at hockey than they would doing some clean drill that makes the coach feel good and makes the parents in the stands say, "Oh, look at this, practice is humming."
yeah.
Yeah, it's humming because they're not doing anything close to a game. Like they gotta make mistakes, and it's got to get messy.
So embrace messy.
Yeah, one
Love
hundred
that.
percent. I mean, yeah, I think that's the way to go.
I don't know if this is factual, but I read that you've got your business degree.
Yeah, yeah,
I When the hell did you have time to do that? I went through your elite prospects. Like, you've been doing nothing but hockey for the last, I don't know, like 20 years.
yeah,
How did you
yeah.
take
I
the time?
have totally. Well, I went to Queen's University when I was in Kingston with Frontenacs.
Oh, okay, yeah,
So I got a couple classes out of the way there. Got introduced to what university life is like, because that was hard. I realized, like, all of a sudden I was like,
yeah,
oh, this is no joke. This is not an extension of high school.
yeah,
And so I banged out a couple there. And I think my first year pro, I might have not taken anything, but it didn't take long for me to start just taking one at a time. Credit to the PHPA and their program for long distance studies,
What's
which was set
PHPA?
up Professional Hockey Players Association. So they would be
Okay.
affiliated with guys that were not under any NHL contract in the day. That was our union
No, I
for
didn't know this existed. That's great insight.
yeah, and they would come in and they would talk to us and let us know that, hey, we got programs for you guys if you want to get some school started, if you want to continue some school. And I was always a guy that I thought that I was going to go to, even went down with my dad to a prep school in New England because I'm from Nova Scotia. Thought that I would go the college route growing up. And then it just so happened that I tried out for Kingston, and one thing led to another. But bottom line is, I feel like I always thought I was going to get it. It just took maybe 8 to 9 years longer than I thought it would because I was doing it one or two classes at a time on the bus, just digging away, doing our thing. I was still by the guys playing cards. I was reading my textbook and they were playing the cards, and got to a point where I was getting close to finished. I was in South Carolina, and that year when I retired, um, and I started to help Jared Bednar as an assistant, as a
Yeah.
assistant coach. Part of the way it worked out was I was went then transferred over to the Citadel, which is right downtown Charleston, a famous military college.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great school, and there's a night program, and I did my courses there. So I finished school off in Charleston. That's how I got it done, and sort of wrapped the degree up, and was happy to have that accomplished for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. Good for you. And I mean, not, but like I can only imagine you got chirped a few times in the dressing room
Oh
for reading the
yeah,
textbooks and going out at night
yeah,
to night school. But yeah, that's awesome. I think that's great for any players, anybody listening. That's fantastic.
yeah. I think it's something that the one thing I always tell guys is you think you want to pour everything you have into your hockey, but you got to realize it's almost as healthy to have another outlet, and also you're not going to miss very much. Like you'll miss a little bit here and there, but we had so much fun in that league. Like I missed maybe 10% of the fun, and I was still there for the other. If the bus ride was 8 hours long, I was still there for for six of it. I had fun. Just 2 hours I had to crunch.
Well, you know what, a little bit different, but I mean, Husk has a kind of similar background where he kind of went and took care of that. And I've always just since chatting with him, and I think both of you guys appear both very cerebral, and I always assume that maybe has something to do with it, just that discipline to go and do that and invest in yourself. Um, you also spent time at Kimball Union. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Between breaks and pro, how much how much did being at the professional level and maybe taking a step backwards, was there maybe a bit of an equation there where it was like a step back but three steps forward, just in maybe in terms of sharpening your teaching skills and being forced to go back to some of the fundamentals?
yeah. In a sense, that was a great way to sort of learn to communicate in a different way. It was a situation where I was in Abbotsford with Troy,
Yeah.
and we had a couple years there. We had a young family. My daughter was just by the end of it was just two, and just as a family, we were far from home. We had a young baby, and life was it was difficult, and we needed to make sure I needed to make sure our family's priorities were in the right spot. And so we had to back off a little bit early in my career, and we got to a point where I had a ex teammate who worked at Kimball. Kimball had an elite boys program, which Tim Whitehead was running from the
That's right.
University of
Yeah.
Maine. Right,
Yeah. He's
he had
still
just
there,
came
right?
there that year. Pardon me.
I think he's still there.
Still there, doing
Yeah.
a great job. I
Yeah.
think they just won again this year their conference, and so I went. My old roommate Eric Long had coached the girls team at Kimball, and the girls team was an up and coming program, wasn't an elite program, um, and it was an opportunity for me to coach hockey. I also did some admissions work as an admissions officer,
Yeah.
and had a great community of work support there as I learned that position. And we lived on that little campus in New Hampshire, and reset our family, got to work with some great young women and teach the game in a different way. I think sometimes I look back on that one, Aaron, and I think about that. Like I feel like I could give them a lot more now. It was I went from the AHL back to coaching that at prep school, and it was a huge adjustment. And I, we did okay, but man, I'd love to be able to see them again and work with them again. But it was really good for our family. I was treated really well there. It was a beautiful place to live and work, and was one of those things where it was hard, but really good, you know. And I think it's something for coaches to keep in mind. Like there's different ways to you know make this living work, and sometimes you have to know where your priorities are, what to take care of first. And
Sure.
also it wouldn't be that far of a stretch for me to still be at Killeen, because
Really.
the lifestyle is great, the people were great. So it's a really good option for an athletic coach or a teacher in that sense, or the university route. But just something different, and it worked out. And then we moved on, and it worked out to work back through pro. So I'm really fortunate for that.
You've had the opportunity to be a head coach, as well as an assistant coach. And is there anything that you would point to? I think particularly for, and I mean, you had a great, not a quote, but you told a great story in a previous interview about watching Scotty Bowman do a presentation, and he made the comment that coaches have to find ways to stand out. It's a profession where everybody predominantly works really hard, everybody knows how to grind, but finding ways to stand out. And I wonder, as an assistant coach, and again for any young coaches listening, what are maybe some of the ways that you found that you can stand out? Like, what does that look like when it's brought to life?
I think there's a couple different things that come to mind in that aspect. I think one thing that I like to do is to look outside of hockey
Yeah,
for coaching inspiration, coaching education, and sort of coaching philosophy, and try to dig into how coaches teach different sports that are similar, right?
yeah,
And how I might be able to use that. In a sense, it's sort of thinking outside the box, but not that far outside the box. It's a way to refresh your perspective on how you can get messages across, or sort of what the some of the methodology is, for European football, or maybe for basketball, or maybe in a rugby sense, the flow and the connectivity on a rugby pitch, of that element is so it's similar to hockey. So I love to watch and sort of listen to coaches in some of those sports and think about how they accomplish that sense of not just teaching their philosophies or principles, but also that sense of team and cohesiveness
yeah.
and flow. So that's a way where I like to try to differentiate myself, because it is, as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, a fact of life that we all sort of take things from the coaches that we've worked with and under. But at the same time, all the coaches we've worked with and under are all hockey coaches. So it's fun to try to expand out beyond that and see what we can dig up in different areas
Yeah.
and different sports. And so that's one area. I think another area I like to dabble into, hopefully make my life a little more interesting with me as a coach, is the comedy area a little bit. Like I just enjoy comedy. I always have since I was a kid.
Yeah.
Whether it was growing up watching Saturday Night Live
Totally. Yeah.
and living in a small town, and just with a group of friends that would just quote the most random movies at all times. And so I take that into my meetings at times when we need to, like, to just try to lighten guys up. And we know that people are more receptive to teaching when they're lighter and when they are in a better mood. So that's an area I like to dig in on.
Okay, so I've two questions on that. That's so good. The first one, just another sport. So, my family, we went to New Zealand and Australia last March, and when we were in Auckland, we got to go. The New Zealand All Blacks have this
Oh,
experience, and it's like it's. I
oh,
probably got some stuff. I got a book up there. It's so
yeah,
cool, and you talk about principles, like everything. I made this
yeah,
comment to a few people. I'm like, anybody that's in charge of a pro sports should go there because every little detail somehow tied back. You could say like the way the play on the pitch was because
yeah,
was the detail in the fern, like everything was woven. It was so cool. But
yeah.
so my first question is, um, if you had a magic wand and you could go watch any team practice or go spend a day with any coach outside of hockey, who would it be?
It would have. I would have said Steve Kerr when they were rolling back then, and
Yeah.
with Golden State. Like,
Steve Kerr's
and
out now, though. Steve Kerr's out now.
yeah, he's out now. So then I would go to. I would probably go to Pep LaGuardia,
Oh man, yeah,
or Guardiola. Sorry,
yeah,
I would go to Pep because he like that. I've read a couple books there, and the idea of the like total football and the aspect of how he used rondos to that extent with his team, and just to see some of that environment, I would love to see that. And then I think the All Blacks would be up there to feel the sense of um, what is it like, just the historical nature and the connectivity that they have, the pride that they have
yeah.
in terms of what they do every day. I would love to just be a fly on the wall in their locker room and see what that feels like, because you're right, it's so woven and it's not overcomplicated. It's just in the fabric of the jersey, in the emblem, in the lifestyle. It would be pretty cool to be able to explore that.
I agree. And my second question as it relates to that, you talk about the humor and I think you made a great point about how people are more receptive when perhaps the mood is lightened or maybe they're just in an environment where they know it's okay to laugh or to
Yeah,
just kind of be
yeah,
themselves. I believe it was prior. I believe it was yesterday morning's press conference. Your head coach Ryan Huska made a call, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the question was something like, "What do you expect from the veteran players?" And you could see that he kind of pauses and he says, "You know what?" He's like, "These are pros. Like our expectations for them now are not what they're going to be once we're into the season. We need to let them ease into things, and they've done this before, and they know how to. They've been training all summer. Like they know how to get themselves ready." And it was like, "We're going to trust them." And I listened to that and I thought, how many times with the same question as an NHL coach said, we're going to treat, first game exhibitions like game one of the Stanley Cup finals and we're going to grind in. And
yeah,
I just, and again, my instinct with that was like the players on your team must hear that and just think like there must be such I think that just speaks to such mutual respect from coaches to players, but also players to coaches. Hey, like I trust you to go do your job. This
yeah,
is a work in progress. And I would also say that that has to have an effect on a staff of just being in an environment where it's like, hey, like let's not we don't have to give out this air that our foot's on the gas pedal 24/7. I
yeah,
don't think anybody questions how intense an 82 game NHL season is, but I think
yeah.
it's a human business and humans are not wired to just go at 100 miles an hour all the time. And I just wonder how is that representative, I guess, of maybe the culture that Ryan and the rest of your staff have started to create in Calgary.
Well, I think that you'd see behind the scenes, like when it's in practice, and where we
Yeah.
are right now, how we're approaching this preparation phase. There's a lot being asked of the guys,
Yeah.
but as you say, while you can ask them for a lot, you also can't expect them to not have to work through things to get to where we need to get to. So we can ask a ton of them from practice. We want them to play a certain way, but we also understand that these are thoroughbreds, and as you say, they're going to um, get up to speed. They're going to try, but it takes them a little while to get up to speed. And as you said, they've been there before. And I think what's happening is the experience of working in the NHL for Ryan Huska, Brad Larson, Dan Lambert, myself now for a couple of years is understanding the mindset of an NHL hockey player at this point in the year and how they need to prepare to get to a really like their top level of compete in an elite league on October 9th means there's a graduation. It's not a purposeful one, but you just have to expect like this is the way that goes. So you hit it. Like it's a good thing to pick up on. Like Ryan is a smart guy, and he's got expectations and standards, but at the same time there's space for people to establish their game, and we're not trying to win the Stanley Cup in exhibition. We're trying to build and have a great start to our season.
Yeah, and you know what? Part of it is I'm um, we're doing another event here in a few weeks. I'm putting this presentation together, and some of the slides are just showing like just recently whether it's MLB, Paul Maurice, Steve Kerr, like all these coaches who would appear to be best in class, like just clips that they are. They have found joy and the ability to enjoy them. You can
Yeah.
see it. It's a partnership with the players, and that would appear to be like that is just the way it is. And if you can't adapt to that, regardless, I mean, I coach a group of aspiring 4 to 6 year olds 3 days a week
Nice.
now, and it's
Nice.
kind of the same thing with them. Like they I can just tell like they want to feel like you're in it with them,
Yeah.
that you're having fun and enjoying the moments, and that's really important. I know we don't have a lot of time here, Cail, but one question I do have to ask is who are the Amigos?
Oh, the Amigos, Luke Strand and Ryan Pinder and Jordan Sigalet. So we were all together. The
Yeah.
three amigos and sometimes four is what they would say, because sometimes I would join them. And yes, good men all. And we used to laugh. Luke Strand was an assistant coach. Ryan Pinder was working our broadcasting and team services. Jordan Sigalet was our goaltending coach, all in Abbotsford, British Columbia, under Troy Ward. And our staff worked our tail off. We worked, and Troy he was a great teacher, and we put on a good program because we worked really hard for it. And the three amigos would get together and let off a little steam once in a while, and then sometimes there'd be four. And I still laugh with my sister, who I'm very close with, about it. They would once in a while, if the fourth had an extra drink, they'd say, "Oh, Cail's little brother is out tonight, it appears," because I was pretty like into making sure I had everything dialed in for the next day. But once in a while, my little brother would go out.
That's so good. That's so good. And you know what? I think that so in and around that era, like Ryan's one of my best pals, and just hanging around. And I can remember the first time I met Troy Ward, and just in conversation in his office, he was outlining the program, and it was like, what time he got to the rink in the morning and all this. And I just remember like the singing. I'm like, is this pro hockey? Like this is bananas. But in
Yeah,
saying all that, I mean, I don't think it's any mistake when you look at where all of you have gone on to that
yeah,
the benefit of being in a community where there wasn't as many distractions as there could be in a big city, and
yeah,
being in that environment where you're just in those four walls just talking hockey, that
yeah.
it must have felt like everybody got a PhD out of that experience when it comes to coaching.
That's exactly what it felt like, Aaron. That's a really good point. I felt like I got my master's in coaching
Yeah,
at that.
for sure.
Troy was such a good teacher. His organization was off the charts. And even right down that language of hockey had a lot of those acronyms and how we communicated our different systems to players. And to this day, when I make video notes, they're detailed, and they use the acronyms that I learned from Wardo. And I always am thankful for learning those aspects of how to keep your information straight, right? Because it's about like the streamline of taking the right stuff, filtering it out, and getting only what's needed to the player. And in order to do that, you have to be right about how you organize it, and just the forethought in so many areas of player, team, travel, everything. He was just the head of it. He's a sharp man for sure.
Cail, before we let you go, any books, resources that have helped you that you might recommend to the coaches listening?
I read an interesting one this summer called MVP Machine, just about where the player development game is going in professional baseball. It's a couple years old, um, and it is one that is interesting in terms of just how teams are using player development or maximizing it so much in Major League Baseball with multiple coaches, with conduits between analytics and players that are almost working alongside of the coaching staff to turn analytics findings into real development. And you're even seeing some teams in the NHL start to go in that direction. And just before this is the graduation of what they say Moneyball was about, finding those uncovering the diamonds in the rough. Well, this is about the idea that you can make more diamonds than you think.
Yeah.
It's not. It goes back to the growth mindset. Stop thinking of athletes as fixed quite so much, and start putting more emphasis into how we develop them and how much better we can make them. Because there are some areas to be. Baseball is digging in hard, and I think sometimes in North America, few of our sports are behind some of these huge sports. So I think it's fun to understand the trends there, and maybe we can be on top of them when they hit our sport a little harder.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Cail, hey, we really appreciate you taking an hour out during camp, spending time with us. All the best to you and the Flames as you guys gear up for big season ahead.
Thanks, Aaron. It was a pleasure. I appreciate the coach's site. I've been using it ever since I became a coach in terms of learning and reading and watching different resources and listening to the podcast. I think it's awesome. I said before, I go to other sports and things for coach education sometimes, because I think even on the other continent in Europe, they're really ahead of it in terms of coach development. And this is one way that in North America we're getting ahead of it, is what you're doing, how you're helping educate. And that's something that isn't just helping us as pro coaches, but it's helping our players that grow up through it. More educated coaches mean better hockey players. So appreciate it very much.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you.